Today, we begin with Johnson, an account of Johnson's rebuttal or response to a prompt from Boswell to write a legal reasoning for something I can't remember exactly. Something to do with a sermon given by a preacher that kind of flattered somebody. I don't know, checked yesterday for what it was about exactly. Of the censure pronounced from the pulpit, our determination must be formed, as in other cases, by consideration of the action itself and the particular circumstances with which it is invested. The right of censure and rebuke seems necessarily appendant to the pastoral office. He to whom the care of a congregation is entrusted is considered as the shepherd of a flock, as the teacher of a school, as the father of a family. As a shepherd tending not his own sheep, but those of his master, he is answerable for those that stray, and those lose themselves by, and that lose themselves by straying. Let me read that again. As a shepherd tending not his own sheep, but those of his master, he is answerable for those that stray, and that lose themselves by straying. But no man can be answerable for losses which he has not power to prevent, or for vagrancy which he has not authority to restrain. As a teacher giving instruction for wages and liable to reproach, if those whom he undertakes to inform make no proficiency, he must have the power of enforcing attendance, of awakening negligence, and repressing contradiction. As a father, he possesses the paternal authority of admonition, rebuke, and punishment. He cannot, without reducing his office to an empty name, be hindered from the exercise of any practice necessary to stimulate the idle, to reform the vicious, to check the petulant, and correct the stubborn. If we inquire into the practice of the primitive church, we shall, I believe, find the ministers of the word exercising the whole authority of this complicated character. We shall find them not only encouraging the good by exhortation, but terrifying them and terrifying the wicked by reproof and denunciation. In the early stages of the church, while religion was yet pure from secular advantages, the punishment of sinners was public censure and open penance, penalties inflicted merely by ecclesiastical authority at a time while the church had yet no help from the civil power. While the hand of the magistrate lifted only the rod of persecution, and when governors were ready to afford a refuge to all those who fled their clerical authority. That the church, therefore, has once a power of public censure is evident, because that power was frequently exercised. That it borrowed not its power from the civil authority is likewise certain, because civil authority was at that time its enemy. The hour came at length, when after 300 years of struggle and distress, truth took possession of imperial power, and the civil laws lent their aid to the ecclesiastical constitutions. The magistrate from that time cooperated with the priest, and clerical sentences were made efficacious by secular force. But the state, when it came to the assistance of the church, had no intention to diminish its authority. Those rebukes and those censures which were lawful before were lawful still. But they had hitherto operated only upon a voluntary submission. The refractory and contemptuous were at first in no danger of temporal severities, except what they might suffer from the reproaches of conscience or the detestation of their fellow Christians. When religion obtained the support of law, it admonishes the censures, and censures had no effect. They were seconded by the magistrates with coercion and punishment. It therefore appears from ecclesiastical history that the right of inflicting shame by public censure has been always considered as inherent in the church, and that this right was not conferred by the civil power, for it was exercised when the civil power operated against it. But the civil power by the civil power, it was never taken away. For the Christian magistrate interposed his office, not to rescue sinners from censure, but to supply more powerful means of reformation, to add pain where shame was insufficient, and when men were proclaimed unworthy of the society of the faithful, to restrain them by imprisonment from spreading abroad the contagion of wickedness. It is not improbable that from the acknowledged power of public censure grew in time the practice of auricular confession. Those who dreaded the blast of public reprehension were willing to submit themselves to the priest by a private accusation of themselves, and to obtain a reconciliation with the church by a kind of clandestine absolution and invisible penance, conditions with which the priest would be in times of ignorance and corruption easily comply, as they increased his influence by adding the knowledge of secret sins to that of notorious offenses, and enlarged his authority by making him the sole arbiter of the terms of reconcilement. From this bondage, the Reformation set us free. The minister has no longer power to press into the retirements of conscience, to torture us by interrogatories, or put himself in possession of our secrets and our lives. But though we have thus controlled his usurpations, his just and original power remains unimpaired. He may still see, though he may not pry. He may yet hear, though he may not question. And that knowledge which his eyes and ears force upon him it is still his duty to use, for the benefit of his flock. A father who lives near a wicked neighbor may forbid a son to frequent his company. A minister who has in his congregation a man of open and scandalous wickedness may warn his parishioners to shun his conversation. To warn them is not only lawful, but not to warn them would be criminal. He may warn them one by one in friendly converse or by parochial visitation. But if he may warn each man singly, what shall forbid him to warn them altogether? Of that which is to be made known to all, how is there any difference whether it be communicated to each singly or to all together? What is known to all must necessarily be public. Whether it shall be public at once or public by degrees is the only question. And of a sudden and solemn publication, the impression is deeper and the warning more effectual. It may easily be urged, if a minister be thus left at liberty to delate sinners from the pulpit and to publish at will the crimes of a parishioner, he may often blast the innocent and distress the timorous. He may be suspicious and condemn without evidence. He may be rash and judge without examination. He may be severe and treat slight offenses with too much harshness. He may be malignant and partial and gratify his private interest or resentment under the shelter of his pastoral character. Of all this there is possibility, and of all this there is danger. But if possibility of evil be to exclude good, no good ever can be done. That's a good quote. If nothing is to be tempted in which there is danger, we must all sink into hopeless inactivity. The evils that may be feared from this practice arise not from any defect in the institution, but from the infirmities of human nature. Power, in whatever hand it is placed, will be sometimes improperly exerted. Yet courts of law must judge, though they will sometimes judge amiss. A father must instruct his children, though he himself may often want instruction. A minister must censure sinners, though his censure may be sometimes erroneous by want of judgment, and sometimes unjust by want of honesty. If we examine the circumstances of the present case, we shall find the sentence neither erroneous nor unjust. We shall find no breach of private confidence, no intrusion into secret transactions. The fact was notorious and indubitable, so easy to be proved that no proof was desired. The act was base and treacherous, the perpetration insolent and open, and the example naturally mischievous. The minister, however, being retired and recluse, had not yet heard what was publicly known throughout the parish, and on occasion of a public election warned his people, according to his duty, against the crimes which public elections frequently produce. His warning was felt by one of his parishioners, as pointed particularly at himself. But instead of producing, as might be wished, private compunction and immediate reformation, it kindled only rage and resentment. He charged his minister in a public paper with scandal, defamation, and falsehood. The minister, thus reproached, had his own character to vindicate, upon which his pastoral authority must necessarily depend. To be charged with a defamatory lie is an injury which no man patiently endures in common life. To be charged with polluting the pastoral office with scandals and falsehood was a violation of character still more atrocious, as it affected not only his personal but his clerical veracity. His indignation naturally rose in proportion to his honesty, and with all the fortitude of injured honesty, he dared this calumniator in the church, and at once exonerated himself from censure and rescued his flock from deception and from danger. The man whom he accuses pretends not to be innocent, or at least only pretends, for he declines a trial. The crime of which he is accused has frequently opportunities and strong temptations. It has already spread far, with much deprivation of private morals and much injury to public happiness. To warn the people, therefore, against it was not wanton and officious, but necessary and pastoral. What then is the fault with which this worthy minister is charged? He has usurped no dominion over conscience. He has exerted no authority in support of doubtful and controverted opinions. He has not dragged into light a bashful and incorrigible sinner. His censure was directed against a breach of morality, against an act which no man justifies. The man who appropriated this censure to himself is evidently and notoriously guilty. His consciousness of his own wickedness incited him to attack his faithful reprover with open insolence and printed accusations. Such an attack made defense necessary, and we hope it will be at last decided that the man in defense were just and let me read that last part again. And we hope it will be at last decided that the means of defense were just and lawful. End of Johnson's part. Boswell here. When I read this to Mr. Burke, he was highly pleased and exclaimed, "Well, he does his work in a workmanlike manner." As a proof of Dr. Johnson's extraordinary powers of composition, it appears from the original manuscript of his excellent dissertation, of which he dictated the first 8 paragraphs on the 10th of May and the remainder on the 13th, that there are in the whole only 7 corrections, or rather variations, and those not considerable. Such were at once the vigorous and accurate emanations of his mind. Whenever I read those sections, it always reminds me of like taking a standardized test and they ask you to write an essay on the spot. That's kind of what they sound like to me. I mean, I don't know where he's making stuff up. Does he know exactly what the early Christians were doing? I don't know. He has some idea, I guess. But I mean, they're well written. I like that one quote. What was it? If possibility of evil be to exclude good, no good ever can be done. If nothing is to be attempted in which there is danger, we must all sink into a hopeless inactivity. It's a good line. But yeah, they remind me of SAT essays. Kind of written extemporaneously. Extemporant? I don't know. Mr. Thompson wished to bring the case the cause by appeal before the House of Lords, but was dissuaded by the advice of the noble persons who later presided so ably in that most honorable house and who was then Attorney General. As my readers will no doubt be glad also to read the opinion of this eminent man upon the same subject, I shall here insert it. Case. There is herewith laid before you, number 1, petition of the Reverend Mr. James Thompson, Minister of Dunfermline. 2, answers thereto. 3, copy of the judgment of the Court of Session upon both. 4, notes of the opinions of the judges, being the reasons upon which their decree is grounded. These papers you will please to peruse and give your opinion whether there is a probability of the above decree of the Court of Sessions being reversed if Mr. Thompson should appeal from the same. I don't think the appeal advisable, not only because the value of the judgment is in no degree adequate to the expense, but because there are many chances that upon the general complexion of the case, the impression will be taken to the disadvantage of the appellants. By the way, who is this right now? The most honorable house in the Attorney General. It doesn't say who exactly is writing this. The Attorney General doesn't give his name though, I don't think. Nope, it doesn't. I mean, I guess we're supposed to know who that is. It is impossible to approve the style of the sermon. But the complaint was not less ungracious from that man, who had behaved so ill by his original libel, and at the time when he received the reproach he complains of. In the last article, all the plaintiffs are equally concerned. It struck me also that some wonder that the judges should think so much fervor apposite to the occasion of reproving the defendant for a little excess. Upon the manner, however, I agree with them in condemning the behavior of the minister, and in thinking it a subject fit for ecclesiastical censure, and even for an action if any individual could qualify a wrong and damage arising from it. Footnote here from Boswell. It is curious to observe that Lord Thurlow, so that's who's writing this, Lord Thurlow, has here, perhaps in compliment to North Britain, made use of a term of the Scotch law, which to an English reader may require explanation. To qualify a wrong is to point out and establish it. So that's what qualify means there. Establishing a wrong. Anyway, back to E. Thurlow's ruling here. But this I doubt. The circumstances of publishing the reproach in a pulpit, though extremely indecent and culpable in another view, does not constitute a different sort of wrong or any other rule of law that would have obtained if the same words had been pronounced elsewhere. I don't know whether there be any difference in the law of Scotland in the definition of slander before the commissaries or the Court of Session. The common law of England does not give way to actions for every reproachful word. An action cannot be brought for general damages upon any word which import less than an offense cognizable by law. Consequently, no action could have been brought here for the words in question. Both law admits the truth to be justification in action for words, and the law of England does the same in action for libel. The judgment, therefore, seems to me to have been wrong, and that the court repelled that defense. Signed, E. Thurlow. Okay, I think that's it for today. And in that case, although here's a teaser for tomorrow. I am now to record a very curious incident in Dr. Johnson's life, which fell under my own observation, of which pars magna fui, I was no small part, and which I am persuaded will, with the liberal-minded, be much to his credit. That's a little teaser for tomorrow. I'm not going to continue on, but we had enough law for today. Till next time, bye from Boswell. Now I will end the stream, hopefully.